The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
We are now about to witness the truth.
it's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am, of course, your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Tuesday, May 17, 2016. Thank you so much for joining us. You could have been anywhere in the world today, but you decided to spend a little time with us, and we greatly appreciate that. Tonight, I'm honored to be speaking with Professor Eddie Glaude, author of the book Democracy in Black, How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul. So we're going to speak with him momentarily. We're also going to cover the primary results from Kentucky and Oregon. I want to talk about Bernie Sanders' response to the, let's call it shenanigans in Nevada over the weekend. And then we'll cover some more news and politics. But before we do any of that, before we do anything else, I want to welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show Professor Eddie Glaude. He is first of all, a graduate of Morehouse College. He holds a master's degree in African American Studies. He holds a master's degree from Princeton University, holds a PhD from Princeton University. He's a founding member and senior fellow at the Jamestown Project. I love the fact that he is from Moss Point, Mississippi. I grew up in Mississippi as well, and he is the chair for the Center of African American Studies and the William S. Todd Professor of Religion and African American Studies at Princeton University. Professor Glaude, how are you today? Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. I'm doing well. I'm happy. I'm delighted to be on the show with you.
Awesome. I'm so excited to have you here. My audience, we've been talking about getting you on for a while, and I'm glad that your schedule permitted for you to be here and to give us a chance to talk about your book, as well as some of your writings. I've read your articles, quite a few of your articles on timemagazine.com, and all of the things that you have to say. I think my audience is really going to be interested in hearing your take on the election, as well as your book. I honestly have to say that I devoured this as quickly as I could because it was that good. And it really put some things in perspective for me that have been brewing in my mind for some time. And it's always great to read somebody who it's almost like you had my thoughts and you explained my thoughts to me. So first of all, thank you for the book. And before I have some questions for you, and we're going to dig and try to do a deep dive as long as I can have this interview with you. But just tell me, what motivated you to, first of all, write this book, and what do you hope the outcome of this book will be?
Well, what motivated me to write the book was all of this talk about economic recovery, that we had turned a corner from the recession of 2008. And when I was looking at all the statistical data in our communities and in my family, I was noticing that people were still struggling, that our communities were in crisis. And part of what I was trying to do is to account for this, right? 240,000 homes lost as a result of the collapse of the housing market. 38% of African-American children are growing up in poverty. In my home state of Mississippi, 50% of those children are growing up in poverty. You see more and more families, young families, in a downward spiral. Black community, right? What I'm talking about, and I just simply said, there's something fundamental here about this, that, Black suffering is invisible. And we have to tell a story about that invisibility, right? And try to give an account for it, because it was happening on the watch of the first Black president. Then you combine that with all of the grieving, this sickening public ritual of Black love, of Black folk grieving the death of their children at the hands of police. And so I decided to write Democracy in Black, saying that we needed to do something dramatic, something bold, to change the course of the nation, to stand in the tradition, the Black radical tradition, out of which I come, and that can fundamentally transform the nation. So that was the motivation.
Awesome. One of the things I noticed in the book is that you go with two themes. You go with, several themes, but two themes that stood out to me. Addressing the values gap And the second thing that jumped off the pages was to me was the addressing our lack of imagination. But in regards to the values gap, you talk about it really in two different ways. The first way is the difference in the value of white lives as compared to black lives, and that jumped out. But what stood out the most to me was your treatment of the gap between our American values, what we espouse as Americans, and the reality thereof. As you know, for example, we say all men are created equal, but the reality historically and presently is that not all people are treated equally. Do you mind unpacking the concept of the value gaps for me?
Absolutely. We talk about the achievement gap and the empathy gap and the wealth gap. But underneath all of that is something much more fundamental. And that is what I call the value gap in the book. And the value gap is the basic belief that white people matter more than others. And to the extent to which that belief animates our social practices, our political arrangements, and our economic realities, no matter what the inputs are, the outputs will be the same. That is to say, we will have persistent and long-standing and enduring racial inequality. And so part of what I'm trying to do with the value gap is to disrupt this idea that American exceptionalism, right? This idea that America is the shining city on the hill, as Ronald Reagan said, giving John Winthrop's phrase a different twist, that America is the Redeemer nation, an example of democracy achieved. And what Gernot Myrtle talked about in 1944 in his classic, The American Dilemma, he said that the problem of race in this country is really a problem of our failure to live up to our creed, that we have the American creed, which is this notion of our commitment to the ideals of freedom and equality and liberty and the like. And then we have these practices of racism, of white supremacy. And typically, at least in Myrtle's book and even in our common sense, the South usually bears the burden of that practice. I always tell my students, though, Flint, Michigan isn't in the South, right? That this is a national issue. And so part of what happens when we understand the American project, Benjamin, it has this gap between our ideals and practices. It allows us to believe that we're always on the road to a more perfect union. It's the most efficient way of managing, right, our contradiction, of putting aside the persistence of racial discrimination. That is to say, we used to own slaves, now we don't. See, we're good. We did, women didn't vote. Now they do. See, we're on our way to a more, see how this is an example of our inherent goodness. And what I wanted to do was to kind of shift our attention away from this idea that the problem is a gap between our practices and our ideals, and suggest that our practices actually reveal something more fundamental about our commitments, that our practices actually show what we really care about. And so at the heart of the value gap, Benjamin, is this argument that what we need to do is to focus on what the kinds of people democracies require. And what the value gap does, it allows people, when people are committed to the belief that white people are valued more than others, right? It enables people to undermine the basic principles of democracy, because they're willing to throw it away in an effort to maintain the privilege of being white. And so I wanted to say that the value gap is fundamental. It gets us out of the circuitry of American exceptionalism and gets us into this much more, I think, rich space of asking, what kind of people are we? Who are we? And what do democracies require of us? Right? And how might we become the kinds of people that democracies require, so that we can create a society with a robust conception of the public good, in which people can be extended dignity and standing, and not only can dream dreams, but can make those dreams a reality.
And you're hitting on so much in that section that really jumps out to me, particularly the ability for America to almost fool itself and to cover from the religious tradition a multitude of sins by saying, well, we weren't what we should have been, but we're better now, and we're always trying to become. And for years, I saw that as a virtue, right? We're trying to become better than what we were. But what you're saying is we've neglected to address the fundamental problems that caused us to be barbaric in times past and barbaric in some certain ways today. So for us to no longer use that excuse that we're simply doing better, but to go back and look at ourselves in the mirror as a nation and see why we are fundamentally, we've done some really disgusting things historically, and we still have some hurdles to overcome. How do we as a nation no longer fool ourselves then and actually look very soberly at who we really have been and who we really are?
Well, we have to tell ourselves the truth, right? And part of it, we have to say that, that the value gap is sustained not by loud racists, not by people running around with hoods on their heads, or the loud racists that we see at Trump rallies, right? But rather, it's the value gap is sustained by all of us. It's in our habits, right? And so we have to understand that this is not just simply going to resolve itself by calling for all of us getting along or talking about dreams. It's going to require a fundamental shift in the material conditions under which democracy takes shape, within which democracy takes shape in this country. Because, I like to say this, there's a wonderful book by Clarissa Hayward where she talks about how we learn race in the very built environment. That when we think of, somebody calling somebody the N-word as the basis of the value gap, right? We lose sight of what's really going on, right? When my dad was the second African-American hired at the post office in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And that was high cotton back in the day, right?
Yeah.
And he moved us from one side of town from one part of Moss Point to the other side, from the east side to the west side. And we were in a nice neighborhood on the hill. I think we were the third or fourth black family in that neighborhood. And I was outside playing with my Tonka truck, right? And I tell this story in the book. And my neighbor's father, the white kid's father, yelled at, "Stop playing with that nigga." And it was the first time I had been called that word. So I run inside and I tell my father is visibly enraged. He runs outside. And this is the typical way we tell the story of American racism. Some black family achieves the American dream, a big house on the hill, and then some child gets wounded by a mean-spirited adult who calls them the N-word, and then that child has to spend the rest of her life or his life proving that she's not that. But see, that's too easy, because I already knew that something was afoot right before I got called the N-word. That was just the icing on the cake, because in our old neighborhood, Benjamin, when it rained, the neighborhood flooded, that the sidewalks weren't paved, that the baseball diamond wasn't cut regularly, that those houses were smaller, the schools weren't as good, right? The people were subject to layoffs in patterns that that weren't experienced as much on the west side of town. So I had already learned it spatially, right, that some people were valued more than others. That's all we got to do is drive around our local cities, and we learn race, we learn the value gap. So part of what I'm suggesting here, and this comes out of my reading of Jimmy Baldwin, is that we have to confront honestly and earnestly the ugliness that's at the heart of who we are as a nation. And then we have to try to uproot the racial habits that sustain the value gap, address the fears that give it power, so that we can then imagine a different kind of world. But getting back to the point you made, the second point that you made in the opening, but it's hard to imagine a new world when the status quo, the forces out there, are working very hard to get us to believe that our only choices are the choices right in front of us. Because there's an all-out assault on the radical imagination in this country.
Yeah.
There's an all-out assault on the radical imagination in this country, and we have to resist that with every ounce of our energy.
And you hit on this in your book, right? You hit on essentially the closing of the what we call the Overton window, and the political discourse in America is starting to be limited, or not starting. It's like we're almost at the culmination of an effective 40-50 year campaign to limit the discourse to being simply between two variations on a particular type of neoliberalism, and we've limited, like you said, the radical discourse, right? I heard your interview with Bill Moyers, and you were talking about we lost a certain richness in our ability as African Americans and citizens to even have discourse around ideas that deviate from the status quo, and how race is used as a means to divide us to continue to protect the status quo. You mentioned James Baldwin. He actually talked about it too, about how if the poor white person, the secretary down at the Western Union, realized that she was in just as bad of an economic state in America, but because of her perception of black people, you know, she felt at least I'm not black. And that division, that wedge that the status quo plays on, both from white Americans and black Americans, but it divides us right down to what you were saying when you were a boy, how in your neighborhood there were visible signs of the value gap. And here is a man who lives right next to you who has in the same type of neighborhood, but still looks down at you as the nigga. You know, let's talk about class and race and the division there and how we are kept divided to the benefit of the status quo. Unpack that for me a little.
Yeah, you know, it's very hard for, for us in the United States to begin to talk about race and political economy, to begin to think about, right, the ways in which race and class, right, intersect. There's the general kind of claim around crude leftists that they tend to think that everything is reducible to class, that it's the universal category. And then you have folk who want to explain everything by way of race. And we're rarely thinking out loud, at least in public discourse, in political discourse, right, or conversation, how race and class intersect. What we're witnessing, I think, today are the class contradictions within Black America in full view. We see a black elite of middle class and upper class that has in some ways gained access to the corridors of power. We see some exceptions who are doing relatively well economically, and these become the faces of a system that continues to produce disposable people who are disproportionately black and brown. Disposable people, that is to say, folks who work every day hard, blue-collar workers who are working hard to make ends meet, as they have witnessed their wages flatline, as they've seen that their homes that they've worked so hard for aren't worth anything, as they've seen college tuition go through the roof so they can't imagine a future better for their children because they can't afford the colleges that will allow them to ascend the ladder of success and the like. And what you have are black faces, right, on the, fronting for this kind of neoliberal economic reality, and crying foul around kind of basic, I want to say basic, but crying foul with regards to recognizable incidents of racial injury. When at the same time you have black workers, you have the black poor and the black working poor struggling mightily in an economy that is not only rigged against a certain segment of the society, but it's also doubly rigged because it's still rooted in the value gap, right? So race and class interact. I mean, there's a wonderful line that the late cultural theorist Stuart Hall out of England used to say. He says, race is the modality through which class is experienced in the United States, right? And it helps us think about the intersection, right, of the two. But then you have people, though, Brother Benjamin, who will invoke racial struggle, our struggle, right, who will invoke the black freedom struggle as a way of concealing their class interests. You see what I mean? They want to hide behind our struggle for freedom, for racial. In fact, insofar as they're hiding behind that struggle, they themselves are protecting their class interests, which more often than not are not in the best interest of the black working poor and the black poor, right? So I'll give you an example really quickly. You would think that the major civil rights organizations and major civil rights leaders would be on the front lines for Fight for 15. right? Because black voters, black workers are disproportionately located in the service industry, and that a $15 minimum wage would disproportionately impact them. But if you haven't seen Reverend Sharpton, who I consider a friend, you haven't seen Reverend Sharpton or Reverend, others, right, on the front lines of the fight for 15, because many of them are funded by Walmart and McDonald's.
Wow.
So I'm just trying to show you that when we start talking about, right, the value gap and racial habits, we have to understand how deeply intertwined that conversation is with the material conditions that inform and shape the lives of black and brown and poor people more generally in the country.
That's one of the things that has bothered me the most about this election cycle. And I have so many other questions, but we're leading right into this because one of the reasons I have been pushing as hard as I can in this platform is because it's so clear to me how people use the language of our struggle as African Americans, and they use what you call the racial injury of someone being killed by a police officer or some type of injustice. They use that language as though they have some type of identification with every black person. However, it's used almost as a cover to protect the status quo, for which they tremendously benefit to the detriment of their brothers, their sisters, their cousins who are still stuck needing $15 an hour. How do you, in this world where you see this paradigm, you're fully aware of it, and you know some of your colleagues or some of your associates and some people that I admire are really using this language, but the language of civil rights, the language of oppression, and the language of I think I heard you say this even with Barack Obama, using the language of biblical references to Exodus, using that as a means of still protecting the neoliberal economic paradigm that is hurting us in the exact opposite way that they're using the racial language and the religious language. Just talk about that a little bit more, because that's one of those things that has been bugging the hell out of me.
Yeah, I mean, we just got to call it. We just got to tell the truth and be courageous and not assume that because folk are black, that by definition we all have the same politics. So many ways, Brother Benjamin, the way in which some people approach black communities is that they almost think that we're pre-political. That's all you got to do is invoke something around black people, and that we all just kind of get in line and we have the same interests. We vote the same way, we think the same way, like some homogeneous blob or something. And instead of that, we need to understand that, you have some black folk who are, we run the spectrum, the gamut. You have some black folk who are conservative, and some of them are gonna vote for Donald Trump, and then you have some black folk who are gonna vote for Hillary Clinton, and some black folk who are gonna vote for Jill Stein, and some black folk who ain't gonna vote, and some black folk who are who are genuinely on the left and progressive in a recognizable way, not just in this neoliberal kind of appropriation of the term. And so, if we have that kind of variety, that kind of difference, political difference in our communities, we have to do politics. We have to build solidarities, right, around particular issues so that we can hold one another accountable and we can organize on behalf of interests that disproportionately impact the communities of concern. And we understand that some people are going to be on our side and some people aren't going to be on our side. So I say all that to say is that, I've grown tired, especially over these last 8 years, of people appealing to this idea of black politics, appealing to this idea of blackness on behalf of protecting, right, what I take to be a neoliberal president, right? President Obama's politics, irrespective of his color, right, are decidedly neoliberal. And then when he speaks when he spoke at the commencement at Howard and then now at Rutgers, he has a very limited understanding. He's putting forward a very limited understanding of what constitutes politics, right? So I say all that to say is that we have to reclaim our story. We have to show when the story is being deployed to protect a certain kind of black liberalism. We have to I think we have to reassert the power and vitality of a black radical imagination, a black radical tradition, and begin to talk about the most vulnerable, the folks who are on the margins of this society, and put forward a substantive critique, right, of this easy and dangerous and insidious kind of racial liberalism that's doing all this kind of work today to keep black folk in check, to discipline our political imaginations. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It really makes so much sense because but it's a difficult task, right? Because we as black people, I always say it, it's hard to critique President Obama. Not in the sense that it's difficult, but it's hard because of the people around you who never want to look soberly at President Obama's achievements and the lack thereof, particularly as it pertains to the black community and into pertains to his politics overall. It's difficult because we have this vested interest to always protect him. And that's something that I wanted to ask you. I'm sober about President Obama. I understood who he was when he came into office because I read his book and I read his words and I listened to him speak. And I understood when he came in exactly he was going to be triangulation on steroids because he kind of made it clear that that's what he wanted to do. But the question I want to ask you is, seeing that his politics and his policies really protect a system that's detrimental to African Americans, do you feel that we have bought into that paradigm of neoliberal economics and this militaristic voyeurism that we have overseas? Have we as black people and some white progressives bought into this paradigm for the sake of protecting President Obama from criticism?
Some folks have. I think some folks have lost their critical voices because they recognize that he's the most threatened president in the history of the country. The vitriol of the right. We have seen and witnessed over these 8 years a kind of nastiness on the part of the conservative wing of the country that would warrant us wanting to protect him and circle the wagons. But at the same time, in terms of policy, we just need to be clear. President Obama is just simply a DLC Democrat, right? Rockefeller, Eisenhower, Republican. This is what how Bill Clinton described himself, right? And I think this is what Thomas Frank has been, as he argues in his latest book, Listen Liberal, right? That in some ways that the Democratic Party, the party that was supposed to be the party to represent everyday, ordinary working people, has in some ways, well, it's not in some ways, has been captured by corporate interest and a certain kind of intellectual elite, such that they are the arbiters, the defenders, right, of a certain kind of corporate ethos, a certain set of corporate interests. And President Obama didn't run against that. He is that. And so part of what I'm saying is that, Malcolm X used to say we needed to be politically mature. And political maturity entails an understanding that just because you have black faces in high places, it doesn't mean you have progressive politics.
Right.
And I say this not as someone who has any animus directed toward President Obama or all the folks who are getting their invitations to the White House and all the folks who love and support the idea, who are really celebratory of the symbolism of President Obama. But what I believe, and I write this in the book, Benjamin, is that all of these Democratic presidents, whether it's Obama, whether it's Clinton, or whether it's Jimmy Carter, all of them are Melvillian confidence men, selling the snake oil of hope and change, that they never really fundamentally challenged the frame, right, of American politics. And so we have to do something dramatic, not put our faith in the Democratic Party, not put our faith in politics as usual or in some messiah figure, but to really understand our power individually as communities organized, right, on behalf of the most vulnerable, pressing and pushing for a much more progressive and radical politics. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It makes sense. And it leads me, I still have a couple of questions for you, so I hope you have time for them. It leads me to the question that I wanted to ask you on this election, but allow me to segue back, because I have to ask you about a flashpoint in my life, which was 2008, and it wasn't the election of President Obama, but it was the treatment of Jeremiah Wright. And it was a flashpoint for me because I know you come from the church tradition and I come from the church tradition. And one of the things that jumped out on the pages of my life during that time was the inability of the Black church institution to even stand up during this period to even protect Jeremiah's rights, constitutional right to preach the liberation gospel, the gospel in general. And the reason I bring this up is because you said something on Bill Moyer's interview that made me drop my water pitcher and run and tell everybody, like the lady at the well. You said that there is emerging a theology that is perfect for neoliberalism, and you were speaking of the prosperity gospel. Could you speak to that assessment of prosperity gospel, and do you see any connection to the prosperity gospel and the laying down of our arms, even in 2008 with Jeremiah Wright as a small example?
Sure. We always tell ourselves the story. First of all, we need to just kind of disrupt the particular narrative we have of Black churches, right? That we tell ourselves a story that Black churches are the site for a kind of prophetic witness. And when you look at it in its details, we know that most of the Black churches in the context of the civil rights movement did not open their doors. That many of them, particularly in Birmingham, for example, were not, shall we say, courageous sites of struggle. So we have to tell ourselves a more complicated story about the history of Black church. In 1903, Du Bois writes in Of the Faith of the Fathers that our churches are differentiating. Some are just becoming social entertainment spaces, right? And others are just high church, right? Formal spaces, right? So in 1903, Du Bois is already noting, right, a strand of Black church practice that's kind of driven by a kind of consumer ethic, a kind of narcissism, and a preoccupation with the self. So here we have prosperity gospel. Prosperity gospel, you can talk about it in terms of word of faith, where your W-2s are more important than your soul, right? And so what you see in many of these churches, right, is a kind of gospel that makes it easy to say that your condition is actually your fault. So if you're not thriving, right, if you haven't received that blessing, you haven't sown the seed properly. Right. And so it's almost like a version of a culture poverty argument that you are responsible for your condition and only you can get yourself out of it. So prosperity gospel doesn't lend itself to a critique of the money changers because they're the money changers. Right? So you can't imagine can you imagine a prosperity preacher in the temple turning over the money changers, throwing them out? No, he's trying to figure out how he can negotiate deals, right? What does it mean when a preacher says the Lord told him he needed a new Learjet, right? I mean, these are exaggerated examples, but the point is that you have word of faith, prosperity gospel that lets institutions and structures off the hook. And I don't believe this is a gospel that is consistent with a prophetic witness. Right. And that's not to say that there aren't prophetic voices out there, because there are. I mean, there's some amazing prophetic pastors across the country doing amazing work. But what we see is a gospel that's perfect for these neoliberal economic times. A gospel that in some ways tames and arrests the radical energies of the most important institution historically in Black life. So absolutely.
And I love that you tie that right back into one of the other themes in your book. In your book, you also talk about our inability to see beyond the meritocracy, our belief that if we're not successful, that it's simply our fault, and how you didn't discuss this particularly in your book, that the church is the prosperity gospel in many ways is really the Pied Piper, or the one that's ushering in this idea into our psyche that if we're not successful, we just didn't work hard enough. But instead of looking at the underlying institution, you discuss this in terms of, we feel that if if America was simply more racially diverse and opportunities were truly equal, that we could get a piece of the pie. And our desire is to get the piece of the pie instead of realizing that the fundamental way the pie is constituted is the problem in the first place. That the way the money is made here, the money changers, as you said, in the temple, the structure of our system is a fundamental problem above and beyond any effort that we can put into it. Tie that into in the terms of the meritocracy, this idea that if we just get the right education, if we just go to the right schools, if we just get the right internship and just get the right job and we work extra hard, then everything in America is fine. And then the opposite of that argument, which is if you don't achieve these things, then it's because you're the problem and not the system.
Right. So, I mean, this is the answer, right, that many folk give, that education is the key to success in this country. And what we do know is that we have more and more, young folk falling into debt because when student loan debt has surpassed credit card debt in this country, and there's no guarantee that a college degree will result in economic mobility, will result in an exponential increase in one's life chances. Although we know that if you only have a high school degree, it certainly does not bode well for you. But the idea that the country is predicated upon a kind of meritocracy helps us not pay attention to the very structured ways in which greed, money is passed on from one generation to the next. The very ways in which the top 0.1% and top 1%, top 1/10% and the top 1% continues to gain all the wealth, even as some of us are trying to retool and gain the education and the like in order to move up. I mean, you give this example, right? There's this, social scientist at Rutgers did this study where they interviewed all of these white workers, and they were saying that, the problem with black folk is that they're lazy. They don't want to work. They don't want to earn things for themselves. And then it turned out that one of the respondents, the person who's made that claim, Brother Benjamin, his father was very close with the president of the local union, which helped him get a job. We want to call it merit. Or another person was saying that, these folks are so damn lazy, they just want a handout. Turned out that his close friend not only gave him the test, but gave him the answers to the test, right? So what we see are these social networks, right? As Nancy Tomasino says, these social networks that pass opportunities along and within themselves. And our social networks are homogeneous. They are 75% homogeneous, right? That is to say that most of our social networks, if you're white, happen to be all white. And not only are they mostly white, they all think alike. And so when you start talking about merit, that's all you got to do is get an education and work hard and you can achieve the American dream, we know that's not true because opportunity hoarding is rampant in this country. So opportunities don't come to certain segments of the population in the same way that they come by others. And so, the illusion that this is a meritocracy, right, hides the fact that our class structure is as rigid, if not more so, than the class structure of England. So if you're born in poverty, Brother Benjamin, more than likely you're going to die in poverty, and your children are going to grow up in poverty. We used to have a class structure that looked like an hourglass. Now it looks like a golf club. Wow. Right.
Wow.
So I mean, this is the reality of the situation in which we find ourselves, and it requires, again, right, a kind of an unflinching criticism, right, of our current arrangements, and not to play these games. And and engage in this polite speech. We need to start telling the truth so that we can actually address the suffering in our communities.
You know, and that brings me to one of my last questions, and I've kept you. I appreciate all the time that you're giving me here. One of the last questions I want to ask you is about this election. And in your book, you discussed how one of your hopes or an idea that you have for this election is what you call the blankout. Essentially saying because of we want to cherish our right to vote, but we reject the options that are being shoved down our throats, essentially paraphrasing, obviously, that we're given this choice between two corporatist parties. And in our way of protesting against that is to leave the presidential ticket blank and vote for all of the down ballot tickets. I want you to explain that a little bit more for my audience, but then I also want to talk about it in context of the choice that we may still have, and it might be over. We'll see. We got some primary results coming tonight, but the choice between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, and the usage of the black community to really, and I want to properly describe it, not just the black community, but the black voting community, the Democratic establishment, the black political class, really using that narrative to elevate Hillary Clinton against the most revolutionary choice I've seen in my lifetime. So let's talk about the blank out as well as the black vote being used to elevate Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, so I mean, look, the blank out campaign is my response to what political scientists have called the fact that black voters are a captured electorate, that we find ourselves every 2 and 4 years participating in electoral processes whereby Democrats try to deliver us, try to get us to turn out to vote with no intention of delivering on policy, with the understanding that we have nowhere to go, And so we find ourselves, right, for example, voting for President Obama at over 90%, right? And when we ask for specific policies, we get the response, I can't be the president of Black America, I'm the president of all Americans. I used to say to people, nobody asked you that. we voted for you at 92%, man. You need over 92%. You need to just deliver to a constituency. And so this fact that we're a captured electorate, how do we disrupt two things? How do we disrupt the way the Democratic Party approaches our community, right, by using us and not delivering to respond to the crises in our community, and the way in which a certain sector of the black political class makes its living by delivering us to the Democratic Party every 2 and 4 years, right? Every 2 and 4 years, we see them come out. Black people died for the vote. You need to go out and vote. And typically it's for some Democratic candidate. And then we go out and then they get their GOTV money and do whatever they need to do with it. And I wanted to say that we needed something bold because our communities are suffering. We needed to create what Jose Saramago calls a civic power outage. And so we have to disrupt this thing. And so my argument is that if the Democratic Party doesn't put forward a genuine platform, a set of policy initiatives, not just rhetoric, but policy initiatives that speaks to persistent unemployment, to the crisis in education, the criminal justice system, right, the devastation happening in our communities, then we should engage in a blank out campaign. We should turn out in record numbers, numbers akin to 2008, and vote down ballot, affect state elections, affect county elections and local elections, but leave the presidential ballot blank, right? And this was a provocation. I mean, we can think about this in terms of, in the swing states, we don't do it. In the states that we know that aren't in play, we do it. But the idea is to try to shift the center of gravity of our politics to the local, right? To begin to think about what we can do downstream. And the perfect example of this, Brother Benjamin, is what happened in the Illinois primary. So Bernie Sanders didn't win the Illinois primary, but Anita Alvarez got voted out.
Right.
There was an organized effort on the part of that local community, BYP 100 and others, right, to focus, along with the super PAC, I think, of Color of Change, to focus on these DAs that are the face of the brutality of these police departments, sanctioning it, right, in so many different ways. And so we saw in that moment, right, how organizing downstream would look, and how if you mobilize and organize and network it across the country, then we could have a national thrust with a local kind of flavor. So this was my I was trying to think about how this could work. So I read it in fiction, Brother Benjamin, with Jose Saramago's novel Seeing, but I was also inspired by the 1998 plebiscite in Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. They were given these options, 3 options, and they didn't like the language of the 3 options. So there was a grassroots campaign to write none of the above. And none of the above won by 51%.
Let me ask you about that. So, and here's the game that's being, and it's somewhat a game, but then there's some reality here that a campaign like that, if effective, could actually work in favor of Donald Trump, right? That's the big scare card that's being played on everyone. And my question to you then is, in the face of someone like Donald Trump, someone who is a proto-fascist and he inspires neo-Nazis, he inspires all types of racism, what do you say to people who are gripped with that fear? And besides the fact that they always have someone to make us afraid of, but how would you convince somebody who's genuinely afraid of a Donald Trump to realize that a move like this might actually be in our best political interest for the long run?
Well, first of all, I would say I would recognize the legitimacy of the fear. Right? I'm not trying to say that a Trump presidency wouldn't be deleterious to our wouldn't do mad damage to our communities. I don't want to deny that. But I always go back to the example of those sharecroppers in Mississippi. When SNCC organizers were in Ruleville, Mississippi, and they were trying to convince sharecroppers to put down their hoes and go register to vote, and they knew the implication, the consequence of doing so. Many of them knew that they would get kicked off the land. Many of them knew that they could actually be brutalized, and some knew that they were risking their lives. But yet they did it. They did it with the understanding of the implication, because they knew that there was something bigger, larger, a conception of democratic life, an expanded understanding of democratic life that would address their condition and the conditions of the most vulnerable. They imagined the world otherwise. And so if we are controlled by our fears, we will never take the risks that fundamental change requires. And we have historical examples of our people taking risks that fundamentally transformed and changed the scope of American democracy. Didn't uproot the value gap, but it pushed the envelope. So I would want to recognize the fear, but say if we're going to really think about fundamental change, we're going to have to take a bold and dramatic action. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we're going to have to kind of tell a better and thicker story about the Democratic Party. I want to ask the question, why is it the case that Black people have to bear the burden of holding off the fascist turn of the Republican Party? Right. Why is it our responsibility? Why can't the Democratic Party simply embrace a policy agenda that will speak directly to our concerns, that will address our crises? So you're telling me that Hillary Clinton and Wasserman and these folk will rather choose to run to the quote unquote median voter, trying to appeal to that swing Republican voter. We saw the New York Times today. Can the Goldwater girl attract the Republicans? Right. We saw in Politico the same article. We know what the Clinton campaign is doing. They're going to bank right. They're going to triangulate. They know we can't go anywhere else, or we won't go anywhere else, or they think the fear card is sufficient. And what do we know happens? That it's under the Democrats that they deregulated. It's under the Democrats that we got welfare reform. It's under the Democrats that we got the crime bill. It's under the Democrats that wages flatline. We can go on and on and on and on. And Hillary Clinton is talking about giving the economy over to Bill Clinton. Yeah. Right. So part of what I'm saying is that we need to do something fundamentally radical, right? And some people say the third party option is the option, maybe. But I'm thinking that just as the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Counts, that just as they conspired to take the Democratic Party, the left, the genuine left, the progressive left, should, I think carefully about how we can push this party, right, to the left. And if we can't, then to hell with it.
I gotta ask you. I love it. I love it because at some point you have to be true to yourself. You have to be sober in your thinking and be pragmatic in your politics, and not so emotional and visceral and respond with fear. But this is the question that bothers me though, and I don't think that you, just before I even ask a question, you haven't endorsed anyone in this campaign. Is that correct?
No, anyone, no.
Okay.
But I know who.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I know who I'm voting for in the primary, but I haven't endorsed anyone. No.
So my question is a twofold question. I'll ask the first part first. I look at brilliant scholars like yourself, Michelle Alexander. I look at some very prominent voices on the left who represent a population of black people that were never controlled by the Democratic Party. Like we've known for a long time what the Democratic DLC, neoliberal third way Democrat has been. But I've seen a hesitation or an unwillingness to go and endorse someone like Bernie Sanders, particularly from the black left and black voices that understand these nuanced problems that we're facing. Why do you think it is? And I want you to speak specifically for you, but also generally for other voices. But and I know you guys are all autonomous human beings and you could do whatever you want to do. But why not endorse someone like Sanders, who, in my opinion, would best represent that type of change that you want, specifically for you, but then general for the inability of Sanders to connect with the black left and voices like your own, or people who just are not willing to go that extra mile and do an endorsement?
Right. I mean, we have to, it's not just simply Michelle Alexander, but, Cornel West and Adolph Reed have been stumping all over the country for Bernie Sanders, doing a lot of work in that regard. I think there's some of us who are just simply wanting to see the same sort of passion that Bernie Sanders voices around the big, Wall Street and busting up the big banks, the same kind of passion and around issues of racial inequality. We're seeing it. He's evolved. You remember how the Black Lives Matter challenged him, and the way in which he evolved on that position. I am so proud, and I know you interviewed her earlier, of State Senator Nina Turner and the work that she's doing to push the Sanders campaign to not think that class, right, that a class analysis, a singular class analysis, is all that we need to address the problems of the black working poor and the black poor. Yeah. We have to understand the value gap. We have to understand racial habits, and we have to understand those things in relation to the material conditions that overdetermine the life chances of black folk. So I think part of the skepticism or the hesitancy has been wanting to push him, right, to have a much more visceral and organically connected analysis around race. Because it sounds, we don't need a lift all boats strategy from the left, just like we don't need a lift all boats strategy from third wave Democrats or from Republicans, right? We need an analysis that reflects what we talked about earlier, the interpenetration of race and class in this country. I think that's the first thing. And then secondly, myself, what I've been doing is really saying to I want to see how this political process plays itself out, and how can we open up space so for us to advocate on the part of black folk, because that space has been so how can I put it, under assault over the last 8 years. Mm-hmm. So in the midst of the crises of black communities and the choices on the part of the black political class, we haven't been able to speak, right, as forcefully and to advocate as powerfully and courageously on behalf of the most vulnerable in our communities. So I've been trying to use this election cycle as a moment to kind of open up space for what will be after it's over with.
Yeah.
Because for whatever, whatever we say, and whatever you think about President Obama and whatever you think about my analysis, he's going home. We're about to see the back of his head.
Yeah.
And what's left in the wake are the ruins of our communities. Yeah. And so we need to begin to figure out how we're going to address that. Now, mind you, I think Bernie Sanders is opening up space. But just like Occupy, there seems to be some gaps in how he understands the intersection or the interpenetration of race and class, of the relationship between those two. And remember, Occupy was making us, Bernie Sanders doesn't emerge out of nothing. Right. There's a lot of space that Occupy made possible. And we had a similar critique of Occupy, right, in the way in which the Occupy movement gave voice to its own concerns. But I do know this: what has been revealed are the amazing and troubling class contradictions within Black communities. Yep. What has been revealed, and I know, and I'm gonna get this out really. What has been revealed is that there is no clear distinction, and we need to say this: there's no clear distinction between the Black political class and the Democratic establishment. We keep thinking that they're two different things, right, when in fact, over the course of this primary, what has been revealed is that the Black political class is almost damn near identical with the Democratic establishment.
I'm glad I asked the question exactly how I did, because you hit every single problem that is clearly evident in this campaign. The fact that there is no distinction between the Black political class and the Democratic establishment, they are one and the same. And we saw this in 2008 when they opted on the side of Hillary Clinton originally against their dear Black brother that they protect so much now, Barack Obama. So there's really, thank you for bringing that out, because I think people miss that these Black people, these Black political leaders, they're voting in their best personal interest, even if it's to the detriment of their community. But then you also hit on something in the reason you haven't given an outright endorsement of Sanders. There's an underlying problem that still has not been resolved with white progressives, with the Bernie Sanders campaign. And even though they've done so much better, I'm grateful for this election because we see growth and difficult conversations. But you put it I'm not sure if it was in your book or in an interview I heard of yours, talking about us not having the language to speak about race and political economy. And you said that as academics that you all should be able to develop or help develop a language of race and political economy so that we can communicate effectively on it and no longer trip over our own feet when we're trying to do something that would benefit us politically, economically, but also in a racial dynamic. So I don't even know if I have a question at this point other than say, amen. Thank you so much for unpacking that and revealing the problems that yet remain. I do have this one final question to put a dovetail on this, to put a ribbon on this rather. The other theme in the book is our lack of political imagination. And you kind of in a way give a indirect critique of our economic system, a very direct critique of our political system, right, and some of the racial problems that we have. But I want to ask you to not just tell us about our lack of imagination, but what's in the imagination of Eddie Glaude Jr., Professor Eddie Glaude, in terms of what America can be. Tell us what you're dreaming there.
Well, the thing is, for me, the imagination is the battleground. It's the battleground. We have to be, Bob Moses, the great Bob Moses of COFO and SNCC, told me a story about sharecroppers in Ruleville. They were on the bus on their way to the courthouse to register, and everyone was nervous because they knew what they were driving into. And this voice just kept singing. He said she sang every spiritual in the hymnal. And they were trying to figure out what she was doing, and they realized that she was fortifying their spirits, giving them the courage to do what they were about to do. And it turned out that unknown sharecropper was Fannie Lou Hamer. Now, what was in Fannie Lou Hamer's experience to lead her to believe that she could change the world? She had nothing, right, about being a sharecropper in Ruleville, Mississippi. In Mississippi would lead you to believe that anything could be otherwise. Right. right? You have to imagine, right? You have to see beyond the opacity of one's condition, as Charles Long suggested, right? The historian, right? And so the imagination is the battleground, right? The imagination on fire with the question of justice. So we come out of a grand tradition of spiritual aristocrats, a grand tradition of people striking the blow for freedom in a country that dared to profane the very idea. And so what's in my heart and in my head is a radical, right, reassertion of democratic energy on the part of everyday ordinary people, right, to lay claim to an ideal of democracy that will fundamentally transform, right, this country. Because whatever this is, Brother Benjamin, whatever this is, this ain't democracy. And so in my heart, I'm hoping for a mass movement of the kind that Miss Baker imagined, Miss Ella Baker imagined, where each and every one of us understands ourselves as the leaders we've been looking for. Wow. And joined with others, right, striking the blow for freedom in very particular ways, such that the most vulnerable in this society can not only dream dreams, but to make those dreams a reality. And that very abstract notion will take concrete form and shape in particular communities in light of specific problems. So that's what I'm imagining, a revolution of value, where we change our idea of government, change our idea of black and white people, and change our idea of what ultimately matters. And we do that through struggle together.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have been speaking to, for the full hour, forget about all the other news. I've been speaking to nonstop for the last hour, Professor Eddie Glaude Jr. His book is Democracy in Black, How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul. I promise you, I read the entire book in about 2 days, just cover to cover, and it's definitely a great read, and it will open up your eyes, particularly in the conversation of race, political economy, just everything that we talk about on a regular basis. Professor Glaude, thank you so much for joining us. Please just tell everyone how to connect with you if they don't already know, and we would absolutely love to have you back on the show sometime.
I would love to talk with you. We're hoping that Bernie did well tonight as he makes his way to California. But you can get in contact with me via Facebook or on Twitter. I'm always on Twitter. So, just do that, or you can send me an email. Just look me up on the web, and we can continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor Glaude. Thank you for joining me. You have a great night, and everyone, I'll pass along his information. I'm sure everybody already knows how to get up with him, but it's been definitely a privilege to speak with him on tonight. It's really something to have someone to put voice to what you've been thinking for some time, and that's definitely what he's done. So I want everyone, if everyone to go get his book, read his book. We're going to have him back whenever he can be back, and listen to his conversations online, his articles at Time Magazine. I can go, I'm just looking in my production room here. I might call on, connect with Anoa or somebody to give me an update, but it looks like the results out of Kentucky with 99% in, we have Hillary Clinton is at 46.7%, and Bernie Sanders is at 46.3%. Those are the final numbers. So it looks like Hillary Clinton squeezed out a victory in Kentucky. So it's a long road ahead to see for him to stay in until June, until California. But we'll see the results from Oregon also. But again, Professor Glaude, thank you so much for joining us, and I really do appreciate your work and your contribution.
Appreciate you. Keep doing this work, Doc. Talk to you soon. Absolutely.
Take care. All right, folks. I couldn't possibly do this and not give you a chance to sign on to voice your opinion. So what the hell? I'll stay on for another 30 minutes. I'm taking phone calls, 857-600-0518. Whatever you want to talk about, Professor Glaude, what he discussed. Also, I know Bernie Sanders has responded to the incident in Nevada. So I'm going to push for another 30 minutes just for you guys to join the conversation, 857-600-0518. And I'll leave the lines open give you guys a few minutes to join in. So it's I really have so much that Professor Glaude has hit on that is very critical to understanding for the purposes of forwarding a progressive movement that benefits African Americans, but benefits all Americans. And one of the number one things that I found that is problematic is our inability to have that conversation, that discourse on race and political economy. And so to hear him say that it is the responsibility of our academics and our thought leaders and our public scholars to help develop that conversation where we can actually speak effectively and efficiently on race and political economy, but not to the detriment of one or the other, but both and. And we've been they've been forcing this false dichotomy down our throats, saying you have to choose either race or politics, or race or class, and that's not the truth. And we have to give the language as well as the understanding, share the understanding with as many people as we can to actually benefit both politics, race, and political economy. All right, we have a caller. Caller, you're live on the air. If you would turn down your radio, give us your name, comment, and or question. Caller, this is you. You're live on the air. Okay, we lost you. 857-600-0518 is the number. You can join in the conversation. So, but that's the thing. There seems to be a significant disconnect in how we understand that intersection between class and race. And we have had a generation of people who benefit from the race conversation only, and they do so by protecting the class criticism or freezing us at race without ever freeing us up to speak about the class problems, always having us look internally and say it's our fault, we didn't work hard enough, without ever looking at the system and saying that there's some fundamental problems with the system. And there have been people who have carried us into those conversations, carried us into the conversations about race while completely intentionally ignoring the class component. That if you're born in poverty, you're much more likely to stay in poverty. So I'm excited about the conversation that has been started by Bernie Sanders, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, and this collision of ideas, this collision of interests, and finding mutual interests in the middle of these competing interests to understand, like Professor Glaude's neighbor who called him the N-word, right? Understand that you are poor and in this community and suffering from some of the same exact things that I'm suffering from, but you're not able to understand it from a class perspective because you're looking down on me from a race perspective. And if we can overcome some of those hurdles, we'll be able to actually move America in a more progressive direction where someone born in poverty might actually, the average person born in poverty might actually stand a chance of getting out of poverty. Let's take this caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question? This is you, caller. I can hear you.
Hello?
Yep. What's your name, comment, and or question?
Hi, my name is Leticia, and my last name is Cortez. And I was just calling because it's very troubling for me to see that African Americans support Hillary Clinton, being that she and her husband passed those insane laws in the 1990s that basically incarcerated 1 out of 3 African American men. And that they built, they get tons of money from CCA and GEO, which are the corporations that run the prisons, and it's basically like a new slavery.
Yeah, so...
And I don't know why...
Yeah, so this is exactly what Professor Glaude was speaking of. Thanks so much for your call. He was speaking of the fact that, and I speak of this particularly, that there are... The African-American community is not monolithic. The African-American vote, even though 90% votes as a block, usually against the Republican Party, that's just a small segment of the black community. That's not representative of the entire black community. If you take New York, for example, I believe 76% of the voters in New York went for Hillary Clinton, but that was out of 17% voter turnout. So there's so many African Americans that did not even show up to vote. And the question is, why did they not show up to vote? Not so much why did the people who did show up vote for Hillary Clinton. The reason the people who did show up voted for Hillary Clinton is because they are a part of the Democratic establishment. And I don't think we should be surprised by this anymore. You have to understand that people like, and I admire them, love them, respect them, Barack Obama, John Lewis, all the rest of them, they are a part of this machine and they benefit from this machine. And so who else do we expect them to vote for? The question is not the people who voted for Hillary Clinton. We should expect that, because they are beneficiaries of the status quo. They are a part of the system. They have a piece of this American pie. They believe in the meritocracy. They're getting what they want. The question is, why did all the other people not vote? It's the same reason why 63% of people don't vote in some elections. So it's not the black community that went and voted for Hillary Clinton. It's the black Democratic establishment that went and voted for Hillary Clinton. And I think if we understood that, then we could understand better that we need to do a more effective job of reaching those black people who are not even participating in the system, and help them to understand how powerful they really could be if they did participate in the system, and not just toe the Democratic line, but come in and help turn some shit upside down. That's the best way for me to explain it. We got another caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, Ben, it's Bryce. How's everything?
Everything is great, Bryce. How's it going, man? What's on your mind?
Doing good. Just leaving work. So, great interview from the professor. Great interview tonight.
Thanks,
I understand everything he said, and of course what you're just saying now. But here's my only thing. When it comes to Obama, no doubt I want him to do more than he did, and no doubt we know how the system can be, or the establishment, you can say it, and a lot of stuff that he went through. And it's his politicians, black politicians in general. But the only thing is, it's like when we put Obama in office, we wanted him to be, as I said before, the superhero. I wanted him to be this one guy. Okay, you're the first black president, so once you do everything, you're going to set the sideline, and it's all to you. And it's like, I feel like that's a little bit crazy, because what about all the other politicians, And so we have to come together. If we can't just put it on this one person. And I'm not, like I said, I'm never this person to make excuses for people at all. I'm just saying that we have to do things together, not just put it on one guy and one man, one woman. And then, we want people to participate in politics, but we have a lot of black people that come out even from our conscious community that say, don't vote, screw the system. It ain't going to change. The white man is that, and the third. And trust me, I understand all the issues and things from our history, but if we change a lot of things through the years, we can still change it now. And I just think that we have too many voices that's just so negative. And I understand where they're coming from on things, but it's like, what about the bigger picture? And if we come together, we can change it. But nobody wants to come together. We just tear each other down, or we'll say this or say that. So, I mean, it's a catch-22.
I've got to hold it right there, Bryce. Thanks so much for the call, man. Absolutely hear what you're saying. And dog, I'm sorry, 617, I missed you also. Let me address what you're saying, Bryce. The fact of the matter is that we can't look at President Obama because he told us not to. He told us that he's not the, as Professor Glaude said, the Manchurian candidate of black anger and black revenge, right? That's not who he is. He did not come in. He made that clear. So I think it's okay to understand that President Obama was never what some people try to make him to be, but that doesn't put him above the critique of the fact that he is the he is the standard bearer of this false religion of meritocracy. He's the standard bearer of this neoliberal economic paradigm. Like, just because I'm fully aware that President Obama was going to be a status quo president. I was fully aware of that in 2008. I have no disillusionment of or disappointment even in his performance, because I knew exactly who he was going to be, because he told us exactly who he was going to be. However, that doesn't negate my ability to fundamentally critique him from the fact that he is carrying out the very functions of the presidency that I vehemently disagree with. The facilitator of this economic paradigm, without any regard to how it affects labor, without any regard to how it affects the working class and those in poor. I knew he was going to do it, right? I'm not disappointed in him for doing something that I thought he wasn't going to do. He did exactly what I thought he was going to do, but that doesn't change the fact that I still have a problem with what he's done in so many regards. Now, I still love him. I still respect him. I still, support him, but I still have a fundamental disagreement with the role of the presidency. And we've talked about that ad nauseum on this show, that it's the role and the job, the capacity that the White House facilitates. It's there to continue our foreign policy. It's there to continue our economic policy without any variations, just small standard deviations away from the norm. That's what the role of the presidency is. I understood that about Obama. He's doing a great job doing exactly that. I just happen to disagree with that. Doesn't mean I don't like him. Doesn't mean I disrespect him. I just fundamentally disagree with any president who's going to continue this paradigm and not challenge this paradigm, because this paradigm has proven to be detrimental to people of color, to white people, poor people. It's detrimental to anyone who was born outside of means. That's my story. I'm sticking with it. Let's take this next caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question? Caller, this is you. You are live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you loudly and clearly. What's your name?
Hello?
Yep.
Okay, Scotty from Columbus, Ohio.
What's on your mind,
I
Scotty?
noticed that, can you hear me?
Yeah, what's on your mind?
Hello?
Yep, I can hear you fine, man. Go ahead. What's on your mind?
I noticed that there was certain aspects this whole transgender bill in North Carolina, and I know this is maybe anecdotal, but I noticed that there were certain black celebrities and figures sharing around these anti-transgender memes about the whole bill. And also I think that one thing that Donald Trump might be able to exploit, even though I think he's a buffoon, some discontent between blacks and Latinos and blacks in the gay community, even though, I think that he'll say, well, look, you might not like me, but the first black president hasn't really done much for you. Mm-hmm. He's done things for the Hispanic community. Even the Attorney General even came out and said that we understand your plight in the transgender community. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And some people, even myself, said, I wish that he would have taken that same type of empathy with the black community during the whole issue of police brutality.
Yeah. Yep.
Even now,
Scott, right? Your name's Scott,
Scotty.
right? Scotty, you hit on something, man. Thanks so much for the call. You hit on a bombshell there. Let me tell you why you've hit on the bombshell, because I'm actually having a conversation on Thursday with Matt Brunig, mattbrunig.com and Demos. I'm having a conversation with him. He wrote an article last week about how the Democratic Party shuns the white working class because of their racist tendencies. Ostensibly, right? Not all of them are racist, but a lot of them, some of them. Let me say some of them, right? We shun them. But then he asked the question: if we're going to shun the white working class because of their racist tendencies, what about African Americans disapproval of the LGBTQ community, right? So he asked that question, and so it's a wedge issue because African Americans are overwhelmingly conservative when it comes to marriage, and the African Americans, to a certain extent, there was less of a division in terms of marriage equality. You can see that divide go down. We're actually closer in parity with the general community in the United States. But when you just ask us about LGBTQ rights and you ask us about homosexuality, African Americans get extremely conservative, and so it was a question that Matt Brunig asked, and we'll explore it a little bit more on Thursday, of this ability for us to reject white working class people because of their racism, but then the Democratic Party still embrace African Americans who are to a certain extent homophobic. And the data bears it out. Now, you're asking if this is a way that Donald Trump can exploit. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because a lot of people express extreme disappointment with President Obama's willingness to fight on behalf of LGBTQ rights with a passion that he doesn't fight for African American rights. And it's clear, right? There's no value judgment against that. That's just clear. He clearly said that he's not here to be the president of Black America, and he clearly has advocated, rightfully so, in my opinion, on behalf of the LGBTQ community. So it was almost like he just couldn't walk and chew gum. He couldn't show the same willingness and the same energy to benefit the Black community as he did for the LGBTQ community and the Hispanic community. So you're pointing out a very good spot for Donald Trump to try to exploit the Black vote. However, there's a big however. We're not going to look past Donald Trump's bigotry and racism. We're not going to look past the fact that the KKK has endorsed Donald Trump. I don't care how mad we are with President Obama. We don't give a damn. Donald Trump is a racist, and that simple narrative is going to disallow him from getting the advantage by putting a wedge between the African American community and the LGBTQ community, particularly through President Obama. So it could be a great political strategy, but it won't work because Donald Trump is just fundamentally a racist. Even if he's just pretending to be one on TV, he's doing a hell of a good job being a racist on television. Let's take this last caller. Caller, you are live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hello, Benjamin.
Yep. Yeah, this is you. What's your name?
Wonderful. My name is Yaki. I'm calling about voter suppression.
Go for it.
Let's see. The argument I have right now is these closed primaries that are going on in states like New York and around the country, are they unconstitutional? And look at it from my argument. The vote is a right of redress for the people. So it is protected under the First Amendment. Therefore, I think the vote should also be protected under the First Amendment. Then you have the arguments for under the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment of the fact that taxpayers are paying for these closed elections where they're not participating, all of them, including independents. And that means that it's almost like the government taking away their taxpayer dollars and they don't actually have a right to use the services that are being provided. Do you see where I'm coming from? All right. I was just wondering if you think that this could be a constitutional case that we could bring up.
Thanks for the question. In general, the short answer is no, I don't think so, because the courts have proven, and the federal government and the state governments, for that matter, have proven that their unwillingness to get involved with private parties. I think people have to understand that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are private institutions that receive federal funding, yes, but that still limits the amount of control that the federal government is willing to have on top of these parties. Could they? I don't know. You'd have to ask a legal scholar on that. Is it something that could be remedied through the Supreme Court and a constitutional challenge? I'm honestly not the person to answer that. I can just tell you that there is a clear precedent set that the state and federal government does not want to get involved in the private mechanics, the mechanics of the state parties and the national party, because they are the ones who make those decisions. They can choose a primary, they can choose a caucus, they can choose open, they can choose closed primaries. They are autonomous institutions who can do that. And I think there's an underlying fear that if the federal or state government gets involved with the federal or the national or the state parties respectively, that will not only, of course, it's already politicized, but it would bring the political parties too close to the influence of the presiding and the reigning party, the party that's in power, the Congress and the White House, or the political persuasion of the court, right? Is it an overly conservative court? Then you make the Democratic Party subject to the political leanings of that court. And so just over the years, that has been a great precedent set of hands off, of having their hands off because of those reasons. So can it work? No idea. Ask a legal scholar. Will our government actually do anything or even allow a challenge through our court system? I doubt it very seriously. Okay, folks, let's see. And yeah. Oh, good point. Good, obvious point that I missed. And because the parties actually run the government, right? So who would, there's no neutral party to actually, they'll be challenging themselves, right? It wouldn't make sense for the Republican Party, who's in power of the Congress and Senate right now, to attempt any legislation that challenges their own party. So that's the most obvious one that I was oblivious to. Thanks, David, for pointing that out. All right, I've got 5 more minutes, and we've taken an entire hour and a half. I have not plugged my own show. So if you're here, I want you to click subscribe. I want you to follow us on Spreaker. I want you to go to Twitter at the BPD Show and follow me on Twitter. I also want you guys to consider becoming a patron, support the Benjamin Dixon Show so we can continue to do the things that we do, and we try to do it well. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD Show and become a patron of the Benjamin Dixon Show. Listen, I think we bring you enough good content every week, every night for you to buy me a coffee, right? Just one coffee a month, and not the cheap stuff. You know, buy me a Starbucks, unnecessarily expensive and not necessarily good, but the price is right for once a month, about $5. Become a patron. Or if you really like what we're doing, I don't really drink anymore, but buy me a bourbon, $10 a month. So if you like what we're doing, just pitch in to help us continue to do what we do. Thanks to Alex, my newest patron. Thanks so much for signing up. And you said something that was really profound in your note to me, and I did read it, and I thank you for it. You said that it's refreshing, and you said eerily refreshing to have someone speak on issues that are in your head. And that's how I felt in the interview with Professor Glaude and reading his book. It's always good to have someone speaking things that you may not be able to vocalize. And that's what we try to do here at the Benjamin Dixon Show. So I've plugged the show. Big ups to Anoa Changa for her show tonight. She did a great job. I watched as much as I could while I prepped. Big ups to Nick Lolan, who's doing his interviews. He's got an interview with Thomas Frank coming up, the author of Listen Liberal and What Remains of the Democratic Party, or what used to be that book. Great book. I have it. I've read it. Big ups to Niz Peterson and Richard Green. They'll be doing the Project Sanity on Thursday night. We want you guys to be here on YouTube. And that's a wrap, folks. I've said enough. We've had enough fun. I've got a warning here that I've got 6 minutes left. I think he meant 3 minutes left, but it doesn't matter. I'm ending the show right here. Have a good one.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support the Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.